Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today seems a little overcast, but rain hasn't started yet, so we're still outside. It's Tuesday, July 23rd, and I trust you're waking up feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day, to seize this day. We are in a study in the summer now on in the book of Psalms, and in particular, Psalms from 120 to 134. They're called the Songs of Ascents, and we're going to have a number of different pastors from our campuses speaking throughout the summer, and so those messages, as every week, you can find them on BethanyChurch.com, and we will then pick up the psalm for that week, and then just spend the rest of the week looking at it from different angles, and also perhaps digging into a little bit more of the historical background as we may find it in the Psalms themselves or in the Old Testament. So under discussion for today is Psalm 124, and if you turn to Psalm 124, you'll realize this is one of about four of the songs of ascent that are attributed to David. So in the title, it says that it's a Psalm of David. And later in the week, we'll look at a little bit of a parallel passage that I think Psalm 124 is based upon. But for now, I just wanted to go through the actual psalm itself and give us a sense of where, you know, some of the impact that David is trying to bring across here. It reads this way. It says, "If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us up alive when their anger flared against us. The flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away." There is this pause in David's reflections on events that have happened. We're going to look at Second Samuel in chapter 5 and talk a little bit more about what this looked like, because I believe Psalm 124 is reflective of that time. But for now, just stay in this psalm. You can see that the events of that moment have left David in a reflective mode where he's visualizing what that severity could have been like. He's saying, if the Lord had not been on our side, recognizing where true victory had come from, right? Realizing where this rescue was to be found. He says, if that didn't happen, just imagine, he says, imagine what would have taken place. He says, we would have, he says, we would have been swallowed alive, right? Their anger would have just overwhelmed us. He says it would have been like a flood, like a torrent, like raging waters that were coming down and sweeping us away. And we looked at that yesterday and began to recognize that here in this text, David is recognizing how God has come and intervened for them in times when they were engaging this enemy, where the anger that was being perpetrated against them would have been so severe that they would have just been swept away. I mentioned yesterday how this is the world in which we're living, right? There is this harshness to the world around us that sometimes can literally just feel like you just got a gut punch. Things happen, and you're left baffled. Like, why would somebody behave that way? Why would people resort to such means? It could be nasty things that they say. It could be the scheming and conniving, right? You just realize that there is a baser nature to what is taking place here, and it's on full display. And you wish the world wasn't like that, but this is the world in which we live in. This is one of the things that I love about the scriptures. Really, is that it presents God in all of His sovereignty, His His you know omniscience. That God knows everything, His omnipotence, right? He's all powerful. Like God is presented in this way, but He doesn't He doesn't seem to minimize the hardships that we find in this world that has come as a result of men's sin. Like the brokenness of the world isn't something that we're going to progress out of. In fact, it's always around us, and it always has been that way. I mean, think about generation after generation. You can go back in the history books, and we're you can read about the atrocities that men have committed against each other. Wars that have slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people. The envy and jealousies, the malice, the discontent. It just seems to be a part of the fabric of what's taking place in this world. You wish it wasn't like that, and you hope that men would learn from their mistakes and their actions, right, and do better. But until Jesus comes back and restores all things, the scriptures are very clear. This is never going to be heaven. And what we rely on then is exactly what David is talking about here in Psalm 124, that God is on our side, and so he makes all of this rebellion, he makes all of the hardships, um, uh, such to the fact that they're not meant to swallow us alive. They're the torrents. They're not going to sweep us away. The flood's not going to engulf us. The raging water is not going to sweep us away. Yeah, this is all about God demonstrating His care in the midst of brokenness that's around us. We're going to look at Second Samuel later on, but right now I think it's enough that we, we have to face head on our own adversities, right? Because they come at us, and it doesn't always have to be an army that is fixed with weapons that are coming after us. No, you could feel that the flood that has overwhelmed you right now could be a health diagnosis, right? It could be a relationship that has suddenly begun to unravel. It could be work that no longer seems to be satisfying. The dynamics at work have changed, and the next thing you know, you're left with this angst about going every single day. And so these kind of floods, these torrents, as he says in the psalm, they come in all shapes and sizes. And um, Pastor Shea made a really good point this week when he's saying we shouldn't ignore those things. Like some would love to put on these rose-colored glasses and act as if that, well, I'm not going to pay attention to that, because the reality is it affects every single person. Um, I got off the phone yesterday with my niece, and her dad, my sister's ex-husband. Yeah, he's in a hospital, and he doesn't look like he's going to make it. He's been sick for quite some time, and she was all distraught yesterday, to the point where her blood pressure just bottomed out, and they wound up having to keep her in the hospital. Yeah, like, talked to her 2 days before. Nobody saw this coming. They were aware of his sickness, right? But they didn't realize it was going to take such a turn. This is what I'm saying. It's like every day there's things around us, and if we don't really deal with them head on, then we are bound to be overcome by them, and we're going to be imprisoned, I think, by our you know by the circumstances of a day, things that will wound us deeply, and we never seem to get past it. right? People could live with such deep sorrow that they never really seem to enjoy the days that are before them anymore. Um, the trauma is just something that's repeated over and over again. And I realize that this is a fight, but there is a rescue. If the Lord had not been with us, we would be swept away. But He's saying, "Listen, I want you to walk with me, even if it's through the valley of the shadow of death. But I will be with you." And He says, I will provide mercy. I will provide protection. I will save you." And so, in the midst of this adversity, you realize that David is saying that God has come to the rescue. Look, in verse 6 of Psalm 124, what does it say? It says, "Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's nest. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped." And so, using again, like, this is poetry, right? And poetry, it's the use of minimal words and images and metaphors, right? To just, speak to our emotional state, and to think of a bird caught in a trap and then finding a way, and next thing you know, it's set free, and it's flying away. It's no longer, held in this bondage. We're not being torn apart by some wild animal, locked in its jaws. No, no. Here, there is this rescue that comes. He will not let us be torn by their teeth. He causes us to escape like a bird from the fowler's nest. And there are many times when God does that in our lifetime. And then there are those times when He just takes us home. And think about it. Um, the initial sorrow of and lament of losing a loved one, nothing compares with that. But I know for me personally, the way I deal with it is I think of that person now, if who's known the Lord, I think about their life in the present, so that all the promises that God is making to us in the scriptures are meant to give me a perspective of this life. So I hold it a little bit ginger, but I have fixed my eyes on what is yet to come. And because of that, every day I am looking to Him for daily sustenance, right? Like, He is my daily bread. And I feast on Him, so that I bring my thoughts under control. I don't lose perspective on the events of a day, and I keep them always, in the view of that God saying to me that one day, all of this is going to be no more. That in exchange, I will find a place where there is no more sorrow, no more pain, no more death, no more tears. And yet we have to walk through this life to get there. But God is promising His presence with us, even in the midst of the brokenness that is all around us. And there are many times when we're like that bird who has escaped. And we look back and we say to ourselves, if the Lord had not been with us, such and such would have happened. I remember one day I had been living in Oregon, hadn't been there for a very long time. My parents came out to visit, and I had a big white Suburban. So I had all four boys, my Cindy, and my parents and myself. So the car was loaded up, right? And we're driving along the Columbia River Gorge, beautiful down there, Multnomah Falls, beautiful scenery. And as we're going, it was probably about sunny day, sunny, about 70. And we're driving, and you could do this loop that goes around Mount Hood. So we take this little loop, get on this the little highway. We're going through the mountainous region there. It's very pretty. And then all of a sudden there's this sign, and it's pointing towards Mount Hood. And I said to to the guys. I says, "Hey, you guys want to go up to Mount Hood?" We hadn't really been up to the top, and they have a one of the EPA work projects. The Timberline Lodge is up there, and I said, "Come on, we can go see that." And I figured my parents would like that, so we get on this road. Well, Mount Hood is about 11,000 feet high, right? So we start going on that road when all of a sudden we get full on into a snowstorm, but not just a little snowstorm, a big snowstorm. And that snow was coming down. We were dressed like I am now, short sleeve shirts, like it because it was a nice day. It was, and I didn't have any chains on the car. I'm thinking, hey, I have a big Suburban. That's good enough. We get up to this into the mountain, and we're on this narrow road swinging around, and the snow is coming down. It's piling up, and as we're driving, I'm white knuckling the wheel right now because I'm thinking we're gonna get killed here. And as we're driving up, I, I'm I panic and I think, well, how much further do we have to go? And so there was a car coming down, and so I slowed down and rolled down my window, and the guy looked at me like I was insane. He was like, "Why would you stop?" Because I wasn't thinking, right? That I'm not used to driving in that kind of terrain. And he says, "Yeah, you shouldn't have stopped." I said, "But well, I just want to know how far up I got to go." And he told me, "You got to, you got a good half a mile or so before you're going to reach this top, where the Timberline Lodge is." And sure enough, man, I got stuck to the point where people had to get out to kind of help me to get moving. So I got moving again, but I couldn't get enough traction. And with all the snow that was coming down, my car began to slide backwards. And as it began to slide backwards, I had this vision of now I'm gonna drive off this mountain, right? So what I did was I turned the car and I forced the back of the car to go back into the mountain. And at exactly that time, there was a huge gravel truck because on these mountain roads, they throw down gravel to help people with traction, not so much salt. They're throwing down gravel. And so this gravel truck was coming down right when I hit the car, when I hit the back end of the car into the mountain. It took the car and it forced the front end to now go in the opposite direction. So now instead of going up the hill, I was facing down the hill right when that truck came by, and I wound up getting behind that truck, and then he led the way down, and I had a whole lot more traction. But I'm telling you, it was quiet in that car. We were all freaking out, and I'm thinking, yeah, if the Lord had not sent that truck. Now, it was in that exact moment, man, things could have really turned south in a heartbeat. And I think of moments like that, right? Where, and I'm sure you're if you're listening, you have a ton of those kinds of stories yourself. But man, that gave me a respect for the mountain. Um, and I just realized again, man, how God sometimes comes and brings this sense of rescue. And so just like, you know, uh, I just shared the story with you, David sharing a very traumatic experience that he had, and he's looking back and recognizing that if God weren't there, what could have happened? And and sometimes it is like that with trauma in our life. We go through an experience like that, and even though we come out of it, man, it just stays with you a long time. Um, we have a group um, called Reboot. It's a recovery group at Bethany, and the whole ministry is to work with first responders, people who have, really experienced some trauma in their life. The ones that run it, one is was a state trooper, saw all kinds of, you know, just saw the let's just say the underbelly of humanity sometimes. Violence, shootings, car accidents, And we have a woman who has been an ER nurse for a few decades, and she's seen her fair share. And and they help people to walk through the trauma that they've experienced and help them to recognize that they survived, that they're safe, that wounds can heal, that your wounds will heal, that God loves us and went through the trauma with us, that God will use this experience in our life. And how many times can you say that, right? Like I know that experience on the mountain gave me a very healthy respect for the mountain. I was a different guy after that. I When I approached that mountain, I got on the weather report. I brought chains with me. You know, I learned something from that. There are many lessons that you're going to learn in this life, and they're not all pleasant. But if the Lord were not with us, see, that's the point, right? That when you begin to see God's hand in the midst of this, it doesn't remove all the trauma. It just makes it a little bit more manageable. And so we can turn around and thank God because of what he did. I'm looking now for those signs of God's, faithfulness. I'm looking for ways in which God shows up because it'll give me that sense of encouragement each and every day that I live. And there are always those God moments, right? Where you can say in your own soul, man, if the Lord didn't show up, right? If somehow or another God had not been on our side today, it could have been so much worse. And and that's why you come back to this one passage, and you recognize, yeah, I have to deal with it in a way that is looking, I have to deal with the trauma in my life by looking to see how God is, providing in ways that sometimes could be difficult to see when you're going through a very dark period. But in retrospect, you could sit there like David in this psalm and reflect and say, yeah, you know what? If the Lord weren't on our side that day, we would have been swept away. We would have been overcome. But instead, we were like that bird that was caught in a trap and then set free. Yeah, this is, I think, a healthy response. It's not denying the trauma. It's not minimizing the trauma. Um, Things hurt. They they wound us deeply, and to act like, well, it's not that big a deal, or just stuff it, deep down inside and just get on with it. No, no, I think God is asking us to really face it, to recognize that, hey, I survived. I'm safe. And what is this experience teaching me? And sometimes the lessons can be, lessons of our own humanity, right? Our own mortality. Um, I had a rapid rate about, maybe 8 months or so. You know, yeah, at least about 8 months ago. Wound up in the ER, and my heart was racing about 155 beats a minute. They don't know why it happened. It hasn't really happened since. But well, I'll tell you, when I came out of that ER, I always think of myself as being this rock, right? Like, what's going to happen to me? Like, I'm just like, I'm praying that I have my dad's DNA. Things are just going to be fine. But when I got out of that ER that day, for the next couple of days, it was on my mind thinking, yeah, you're not a machine, dude. Um, like you're mortal just like everybody else. And even though God has provided really good health for me, I um I was still I was in that ER, and I had all these wires hooked up to me thinking, yeah, in a moment this could go sideways. But then in the days after that, I began to realize, yeah, but I'm thankful that I was nearby the hospital. I was thankful my wife, who's a nurse, and she's had years and years of experience working in a telemetry unit, in a heart unit. She knew exactly what was going on, and she didn't panic. She was just like, "Come on, we're gonna go." If it may turn on its own, but if it doesn't, they might have to give you a cardio version. And she was explaining this as we're driving down to the hospital, and I realized, boy, if the Lord wasn't with me, and there was this calming effect that began to take over my life, and so now again, I learned from that, right? I recognize again that this hope that I have in Jesus isn't it's a very present help. It's going to help me to deal with the circumstances that I'm going to find myself in every single day. That I need to practice looking for God's hand and his faithfulness in the moments, because in the quietness of a night, when when my mind is racing in 1,000 directions, that's what I got to turn to. That's where I got to go back, and I recognize, yeah, I'm not going to live in this trauma. God says, no, he has come, set me free. He's come to give me a peace that passes all understanding, even in the midst of the trials. In this world, Jesus says, there is going to be much sorrow, but be of good cheer, because I have overcome the world. And what he's implying is, if he's overcome the world, then we're going to overcome the world, because we are in him. Because our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Well, I want to thank you for being a part of this morning study. Um, it's not just enough to visualize, you know, um, the severity of the trauma, which I think is helpful, so we don't minimize things. But at the same time, to recognize that all of our lives are open before God, and he's always a part of our everyday experience. And we can always look back and say, this could have been so much worse if God wasn't here. He provided this doctor, or he provided that job, or he provided this person. And all of a sudden, life becomes that much more manageable, because you see that God is in the midst of all of the circumstances. Well, my friends, thank you so much for joining me again this morning. I trust that these reflections on the scriptures would be a source of encouragement to you, enabling you to go out and seize the day, recognizing that God is good all the time. Appreciate having this time. Lord willing, we'll spend a little bit more time tomorrow. Till then, seize the day, my friend. God bless you.